The Obsidian Council did not rise for interruptions. In the 30 years since the Hanseong underworld built its quiet empire beneath Seoul's glittering skyline, the men in that room had remained seated through presidents, billionaires, and kings of lesser syndicates. Power in this world was acknowledged carefully, and rarely. So when the council doors unlocked with a soft mechanical click that evening, Lee Junhyuk didn't bother to look up. He was still reviewing the numbers on the tablet in front of him. Shipping routes, territorial shifts, the quiet calculations that kept ambitious men alive in rooms like this. Another staff movement, he assumed. Another background presence. Another invisible worker moving through spaces too expensive for her shoes. Soft footsteps crossed the marble floor. Measured and hurried. Something about the rhythm was wrong. Junhyuk's eyes lifted slightly. Just in time to see the first council member rise. Not abruptly. Not in alarm. But slowly. Respectfully. Chair slid back. Then another. And another. Around the long obsidian table, the most feared men in the Hanseong underworld were standing to their feet, one by one, in complete silence. The air in the room shifted. Heavy. Deliberate. For the first time since entering the chamber, Lee Junhyuk looked fully toward the doors. And froze. Because walking calmly into the center of the council floor, dressed in the same simple cleaner's uniform he had barely noticed 3 days ago, was Zara Nwankwo. The quiet woman who mopped the executive hallways. The woman he had dismissed without a second thought. The woman no one important was supposed to know. Except now. The Obsidian Council was standing for her. And as the last chair settled into silence behind the most powerful men in Seoul's underworld, Lee Junhyuk felt something rare and dangerous move through his perfectly controlled mind. Not fear. Something worse. Realization. Because in the Hanseong underworld, mistakes were expensive. And he was suddenly very certain. He had just made one. 3 days earlier, no one in Hanseong headquarters had been standing. The executive corridor was polished to a mirror shine, the kind of quiet luxury that reminded every employee exactly how far above their pay grade this building operated. Footsteps echoed sharply. Assistants moved quickly. Security watched everything. And in the middle of it all, Zara Nwankwo worked with steady, unhurried precision. Her cart moved smoothly along the marble floor, gloved hands methodical as she wiped down the already spotless glass panels outside the strategy wing. She did not rush. She did not linger. She simply moved like someone who understood the value of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Invisible. 2 junior analysts passed her without slowing. "Make sure this section is finished before the council meeting," one of them muttered, not even looking in her direction. Zara inclined her head slightly. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, even, easy to ignore. Further down the hall, a group of operations staff stepped around her cart with mild irritation, one of them clicking his tongue under his breath as if she were an inconvenient piece of furniture. No reaction crossed her face. The cloth in her hand moved in smooth, careful strokes. Polish. Polish again. At exactly 10:12 a.m., the private elevator at the end of the corridor opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Lee Junhyuk stepped out first. Dark suit. Controlled stride. The quiet gravity of a man who was already being watched by the Obsidian Council whether he liked it or not. Conversations lowered as he passed. Assistants straightened. Security subtly adjusted their posture. Zara did not turn immediately. She finished the final clean line across the glass before stepping back with the same calm precision she had maintained all morning. Junhyuk's eyes flicked toward her only briefly. The quick, efficient scan of a man cataloging his surroundings without emotional investment. Just staff. Just background. Just irrelevant. "Have this corridor cleared before noon," he said casually as he passed, already moving forward. No pause. No second glance. Behind him, several junior staff were already watching to see how quickly the cleaner would scramble to comply. Zara's hands stilled for exactly half a second. Then she inclined her head. "Of course, sir." No offense. No tension. No visible reaction at all. Just quiet acceptance delivered with perfect composure. Jun Hyuk continued walking without slowing. Behind him, the corridor returned to its normal rhythm. Footsteps, quiet conversations, the soft hum of controlled power moving through expensive walls. And at the center of it all, the woman everyone had just dismissed returned calmly to her work. Unbothered, unrushed, unseen. For now. Control in Hanseong headquarters was a language. Lee Jun-hyuk spoke it fluently. By mid-morning, the executive strategy room had filled with the low, measured tension that always followed his arrival. Screens glowed along the far wall, streaming live shipping data and territorial reports. Senior operators sat straighter than usual, tablets ready, eyes carefully neutral. No one wasted his time. Jun-hyuk stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly against the glass surface as he reviewed the final briefing. The Busan corridor stabilizes within 48 hours, the logistics chief reported carefully. Northern routes remain under observation, but projections are favorable. Not favorable, Jun-hyuk corrected without looking up. Certain. The room went still. It wasn't the volume of his voice that commanded attention. It was the precision. The quiet confidence of a man who rarely spoke without already knowing the outcome. Across the table, the finance director adjusted his glasses. There is one additional matter, Chairman. Jun-hyuk's eyes lifted. That was all it took. The Obsidian Council has advanced your review timeline, the director continued carefully. They're requesting updated performance metrics before the next session. The air shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. Jun-hyuk's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened slightly. The council did not rush evaluations unless something had caught their interest, or their concern. When? He asked. 72 hours. Pause settled across the table. Long enough for everyone present to understand exactly what that meant. Pressure. Measured. Intentional. Jun-hyuk straightened slowly, fingers smoothing once over the cuff of his sleeve. A small, controlled motion that those who worked closely with him had learned to read carefully. They want confirmation, he said quietly. No one answered. They didn't need to. The Obsidian Council was watching. And in Hanseong's world, being watched by men like that was never neutral. Still, when Jun-hyuk stepped away from the table and moved toward the window overlooking the Seoul skyline, his posture remained perfectly composed. Ambition had always required pressure. And pressure was something he knew how to manage. They'll have their confirmation, he said calmly. Behind him, shoulders visibly eased around the table. Orders began moving quickly, quietly, efficiently. Because when Lee Jun-hyuk spoke with that level of certainty, things usually aligned in his favor. Usually. Outside the glass, the city stretched endlessly, glittering, restless, full of men who believed they understood the board. Jun-hyuk's reflection stared back at him in the window's dark surface. Controlled, focused, certain of his next move. What he did not see, what no one in that room had yet realized, was that somewhere within the same building, a woman in a cleaner's uniform had already begun quietly changing the game. By late afternoon, Hanseong headquarters had returned to its usual rhythm of controlled efficiency. At least on the surface. Zaran Wonquo moved her cart down the executive wing with the same steady precision she had shown all morning. Her expression calm, her posture unhurried. The marble floors reflected the soft glow of the overhead lights, every surface already immaculate. Still she worked. Still she watched. Ahead, the security checkpoint outside the restricted strategy corridor came into view, a place most staff avoided unless they enjoyed being redirected. Zara did not slow. The two guards stationed at the checkpoint noticed her immediately. One of them straightened, just slightly. It was a small movement, easy to miss, but not normal. As she approached, the younger guard's hand hovered briefly near the scanner before he caught himself and stepped aside instead. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Not hey. Not cleaning staff." The word slipped out before he could stop it. Zara's eyes lifted to him for exactly 1 second. Unreadable. Then she inclined her head once in acknowledgement and continued forward without comment. Behind her, the younger guard exhaled slowly. "You're getting sloppy," the senior guard muttered under his breath. But his tone carried no real reprimand. Further down the corridor, two mid-level executives were speaking in low voices near the glass conference room. Their conversation faded the moment Zara's cart rolled past. One of them stepped back automatically to give her space. "Gen subtle. Gen wrong." Most cleaners in Hanseong headquarters learn very quickly to work around people. Zara, however, seemed to move as though the space adjusted around her. Near the end of the hall, she stopped outside a secured door marked Level 4 authorization. Her cloth moved slowly across the brushed steel panel beside the biometric reader. Polish. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the scanner. Then, with quiet precision, she reached into her cart. From the outside, it looked like a routine adjustment, just another cleaning motion among dozens she had performed that day. But for exactly half a second, the scanner light blinked green. Quick. Inside the nearby glass office, one of the junior analysts froze mid-sentence. "Did you see that?" he whispered. His colleague frowned. "See what?" The scanner had already returned to standby. Zara was already moving again, her cart rolling smoothly down the corridor as if nothing at all had happened. No rush, no tension, no visible mistake. Just quiet, careful movement through a building that was beginning, very slowly, to react to her presence in ways no one had fully explained. And somewhere several floors above, Lee Junhyuk continued preparing for the Obsidian Council's review. Completely unaware that the most unusual variable in his building was currently pushing a cleaning cart past his most secure doors. Only, deliberately, and far too comfortably for a woman who was supposed to be invisible. The first person important enough to notice her did not react immediately. Chairman Kwon had built his reputation on patience. From the quiet observation balcony overlooking the lower executive floors, the senior member of the Obsidian Council stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes tracking movement below with the calm focus of a man who missed very little. Most days, there was nothing worth a second glance. Today there was. His gaze followed the cleaner moving steadily along the polished corridor 3 levels down. She did not rush, did not fidget, did not carry the nervous, careful energy most temporary staff developed within their first week inside Hanseong headquarters. She moved like someone who understood the building. Oh well. Beside him, one of the younger council aides shifted slightly. "Is there an issue, Chairman?" Chairman Kwon did not answer immediately. Below, Zara paused briefly near the glass railing, adjusting something inside her cart with smooth, practiced precision. For a moment, the overhead lights caught her face fully. Unreadable. Composed in a way that did not belong to someone earning hourly wages. "Interesting," Kwon murmured quietly. The aide frowned faintly but said nothing more. Across the lower floor, Zara's phone vibrated once. Not loudly, just enough. Her hand moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving the device from the hidden pocket inside her uniform. She did not check the screen immediately. Instead, she guided her cart into the shadowed service alcove near the maintenance doors before lifting the phone to her ear. "Yes," she said softly. Silence followed. Then, after a brief pause, "Position confirmed." Her tone did not change, did not tighten, but her eyes lifted briefly toward the upper levels of the building, toward the observation balcony where Chairman Kwon stood watching. For the briefest second, their gazes almost aligned. Almost. Zara turned away first. "Proceed on schedule," she added quietly, and ended the call. Back on the balcony, the council aide shifted again, unease threading faintly into his posture. "Chairman." Kwon's expression remained thoughtful, his gaze still fixed on the now moving cleaner below. "Tell me," he said mildly, "how long has she been assigned to this building?" The aide hesitated. 3 days, sir. Temporary rotation. 3 days. Kwon's eyes narrowed just slightly. Below, Zara resumed her steady path down the corridor, her cart rolling smoothly over the marble as if she had never paused at all. Invisible, efficient, unremarkable. Except now, someone important was paying attention. And in Hanseong headquarters, that was rarely a coincidence. The summons came without warning. At 8:10 p.m., every senior executive inside Hanseong headquarters received the same short directive. Obsidian Council convening. Immediate attendance. By 8:22, the council chamber was already heavy with controlled tension. The room itself was designed for pressure. Long obsidian table, low ambient lighting, walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. Conversations stayed quiet here. Mistakes stayed remembered. Lee Jun-hyuk entered without hesitation. On the surface, his stride remained as precise as ever, dark suit immaculate, expression composed into that familiar, unreadable calm the Obsidian Council had come to expect. Inside the room, however, the air was already wrong. Too still. Too watchful. Around the table, several senior council members were present earlier than scheduled. Another quiet signal that tonight's session carried more weight than the official briefing had suggested. Chairman Kwon sat near the head of the table, fingers loosely folded. His sharp eyes lifting as Jun-hyuk approached. "You came quickly," Kwon observed mildly. "Efficiency is expected," Jun-hyuk replied smoothly, taking his seat. A faint murmur of approval moved through one side of the table. But not all of it. Across the chamber, two rival faction heads exchanged a glance that lasted half a second too long. Pressure. Measured. Intentional. The meeting began without ceremony. Shipping stability. Territorial adjustments. Compliance positioning. Each report was delivered cleanly, and for the first 20 minutes, Jun-hyuk's responses landed with the same controlled precision that had built his rising reputation inside Hanseong. Until the Eastern Corridor projections. The voice came from the far end of the table. Neutral. But sharp. Jun-hyuk's eyes shifted. Chairman Kwon was watching him directly now. "Your growth curve is ambitious," Kwon continued. "Not praise. Not criticism. Something more dangerous in between." Jun-hyuk inclined his head slightly. "Ambition, when properly managed, produces results." Silence followed. Heavy. Testing. For the first time that evening, the power balance in the room felt less settled. Less certain. Across the chamber, one of the older council members leaned back slowly in his chair, studying Jun-hyuk with open calculation. The Obsidian Council was not just reviewing numbers tonight. They were measuring him. The chamber doors clicked. Mechanical. Every conversation in the room died instantly. Jun-hyuk's gaze shifted toward the entrance, irritation flickering faintly beneath his otherwise controlled exterior. The session had not been scheduled for interruptions. The doors began to open. Slowly. Deliberately. And though no one in the room spoke, the atmosphere changed. Something, subtle but undeniable, moved through the chamber like the first crack of distant thunder. At the head of the table, Chairman Kwon's eyes sharpened slightly, as if he had been expecting this moment. And for the first time that night, Lee Jun-hyuk felt the careful rhythm of the meeting slip half a step out of his control. The doors opened without hurry. No announcement, no escort. Just the quiet, deliberate swing of polished steel revealing the figure stepping calmly into the Obsidian Council chamber. For half a second no one moved. Lee Jun-hyuk's attention shifted toward the entrance with controlled irritation already forming. The meeting had not reached a point where interruptions were tolerated. Then he saw her. Zaran Wonko. Still in the same simple cleaner's uniform. Still composed. Still moving with that steady, unbothered rhythm he had dismissed 3 days ago in the executive corridor. She walked forward alone. Measured steps across the marble. And hurried. And then, Chairman Kwon rose to his feet. The motion was smooth. Deliberate. Respectful. The sound of his chair sliding back cut through the silence like a blade. Jun-hyuk's eyes sharpened. Around the long obsidian table, another council member stood. Then another. One by one. The most feared men in the Hanseong underworld rose from their seats in complete silence. No confusion. No hesitation. Only recognition. The room froze. Every executive along the perimeter stiffened, their carefully controlled expressions cracking just slightly as the full weight of the moment settled into the air. Because the Obsidian Council did not stand. Not for wealth. Not for power displays. And certainly not for staff. Yet Zara continued walking forward, her posture unchanged. Her expression calm in a way that now read very differently under the room's heavy attention. She stopped at the open space near the center of the table. Only then did her eyes lift. Direct. Unmoved by the wall of authority now standing in acknowledgement of her presence. Lee Junhyuk did not rise. But for the first time since entering the chamber, his stillness was no longer entirely controlled. His mind moved fast. Too fast. Replaying. The quiet cleaner in the corridor. Her steady voice. The way security had shifted around her. The small irregularities he had dismissed as background noise. Piece by piece, the pattern locked into place. Across the table, Chairman Kwon inclined his head slightly toward Zara. Not deeply, but with unmistakable respect. Director Nwankwo, he said calmly. The title landed like a dropped blade. Director. Not cleaner. Not staff. Director. Something cold and precise slid through Junhyuk's chest. Not panic. Something worse. Recognition. Because in the Hanseong underworld, power rarely announced itself loudly. Positioned quietly. Waited patiently. And revealed itself only when the board was already set. Zara's gaze shifted then, slowly, deliberately, until it met his across the long obsidian table. No accusation. No triumph. Just calm, unshakable awareness. And in that exact moment, Lee Junhyuk understood with perfect clarity. He had never been the one observing her. He had been the one under evaluation all along. The silence did not break immediately. Settled. Heavy and deliberate, like the room itself was recalibrating around a new center of gravity. Chairman Kwon was still standing. So were the others. Zara Nwankwo did not acknowledge the shift with anything as obvious as surprise. She simply inclined her head once, a measured courtesy, before her gaze returned to the length of the obsidian table. Composed. Entirely too comfortable. Director Nwankwo, Kwon repeated. His tone smooth but edged with something that sounded very close to respect. Your timing is precise. Zara's voice, when she spoke, was soft enough to force the room to lean into it. Precision tends to be more efficient, she replied. A few of the older council members exchanged brief glances. Not dismissive. Assessing. Across the chamber, the subtle hierarchy that had governed the room only minutes ago began to shift in quiet, almost invisible increments. Shoulders straightened. Eyes sharpened. Several executives who had been comfortably seated before now stood a fraction more alert, as if instinctively adjusting to a presence they could not afford to underestimate. Lee Junhyuk remained seated. Deliberately. His posture was still controlled, still precise, but his attention was no longer divided between reports and council signals. It was fixed entirely on her. You've been in my building for 3 days, he said finally. Not a question. Zara's gaze moved to him without hurry. Yes. One word. Even. Unapologetic. The air tightened. Junhyuk's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table, still enough that most would miss the calculation moving behind his eyes. Pride warred briefly with instinct, the sharp, strategic part of his mind already adjusting to new information. You move very comfortably for temporary staff, he continued. Still calm. Still measured. But the room was listening now. Every word. Every breath. Zara held his gaze without flinching. I go where I'm positioned to be, she said. No more. No less. The answer was smooth. And completely unhelpful. A faint shift of weight moved through the council members. Not tension exactly, interest. The kind that surfaced when two very controlled players began quietly measuring each other across a board no one else could fully see. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lee Junhyuk stood. Lowly. Not in deference. Not in submission. But in acknowledgement, it was subtle, carefully measured, and impossible for anyone in the room to misinterpret. Because in Han Seong's world, standing was never accidental. Across the obsidian table, something almost imperceptible flickered in Zara's eyes. Not victory, not satisfaction, recognition. And around them, the Obsidian Council watched very closely as the balance in the room settled into something new, something far more dangerous than before. The council chamber did not empty quickly. Men of that level never rushed their exits. But within 15 minutes, the formal session had dissolved into quiet side conversations and controlled dispersal. The tension that had filled the room earlier had not disappeared. It had simply relocated. Lee Junhyuk did not leave immediately. He remained near the long obsidian table, posture composed, expression once again carved into that familiar calm, but his attention was no longer on the council members filtering toward the doors. It was on her. Zara stood near the far window, the city lights of Seoul stretching behind her in sharp lines of gold and shadow. Up close, the cleaner's uniform looked almost deliberate now. Too neat, too precisely worn to be accidental. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Junhyuk crossed the distance between them. Measured steps. Controlled pace. He stopped just close enough to lower his voice without risking the room's lingering ears. "You've been evaluating my operation," he said quietly. Not an accusation. Not quite a question. Zara turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. "I've been observing," she corrected gently. The distinction landed exactly where she intended it to. Junhyuk's gaze sharpened a fraction. Outside the glass, traffic moved far below, the city unaware that the balance inside Hanseong had shifted half a degree off its axis. "You could have revealed your position earlier," he said. "Could have," she agreed. Her tone remained calm. Infuriatingly calm. "But that would have limited what I needed to see." The words were soft, precise. Junhyuk studied her more carefully now. Not as staff, not as background, but as a variable he had failed to properly calculate. A rare occurrence. "You allowed me to underestimate you," he said. For the first time, something almost like faint amusement touched the edge of her eyes. "I didn't interfere with your assumptions," she replied. A quiet beat passed between them. Respect, in Hanseong's world, was rarely given in words. It moved in subtler ways. Junhyuk exhaled slowly, one hand slipping into his pocket. A small shift, but one that signaled the tight edge of the earlier confrontation had eased. "Then I'll adjust my evaluation," he said. Zara met his gaze fully now. "And what conclusion have you reached?" There it was. Not challenge. Not provocation. Assessment. Junhyuk held her eyes for a long second. Long enough for the strategic undercurrent between them to become unmistakable. "You're not here by accident," he said finally. Faint pause. Good," Zara murmured softly. The word was almost approving. Outside, the city lights continued their restless shimmer. Inside, something far more complicated had just taken shape between them. Not trust, not alliance, but the careful beginning of mutual recognition. And in the Hanseong underworld, that was often where the most dangerous partnerships began. By morning, the Hanseong headquarters was already buzzing with quiet speculation. No official announcement had been made. No memo had circulated. And yet, everyone important knew something had shifted. The executive briefing hall filled quickly, senior operators and division heads taking their seats with the careful composure of people who understood they were about to witness something deliberate. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors opened. Lee Junhyuk entered first. His stride was as controlled as ever, expression composed, presence carrying the same quiet authority that had built his reputation inside the Hanseong underworld. But this time the room noticed what came next. Zara Nwankwo walked in beside him. Not behind, not trailing, beside. A ripple moved through the room, subtle but unmistakable. It sharpened, postures straightened. Calculations began running behind carefully neutral faces. At the front of the hall, Chairman Kwon was already seated. Watching. Waiting. Jun Hyuk stopped at the center position, his gaze sweeping the room once before he spoke. Effective immediately, he said calmly. Hanseong Underworld will be entering a provisional strategic review of our international channels. Measured. Controlled. Director Zara Nwankwo will be overseeing the external assessment. The words landed cleanly, like a stone dropped into still water. For half a second the room froze. Because titles mattered here. Positioning mattered more. Across the hall, several senior operators straightened sharply, their earlier uncertainty replaced by something much more careful. Recognition. Beside him, Zara remained perfectly composed. Her posture relaxed but unmistakably authoritative as she surveyed the room that had ignored her only days ago. No triumph. No display. Just quiet ownership of the space she now occupied. Chairman Kwon inclined his head slightly. Formal acknowledgement. It was enough. The message was clear. The board had shifted. As the briefing moved forward, Jun Hyuk's voice remained steady, outlining the next phase of Hanseong's expansion strategy. But for the first time, there was a subtle difference in the room's attention. It no longer centered on him alone. It moved between them, balanced, watchful. Near the end of the session, as executives began quietly absorbing the implications, Jun Hyuk allowed himself one brief glance in Zara's direction. Her eyes met his easily, unshaken, knowing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. But something unspoken settled into place between them. Not quite alliance, not quite opposition. Potential. Carefully contained. Outside the glass walls, Seoul's skyline shimmered under the morning light, unaware that the power structure inside Hanseong had just been rewritten. And somewhere beneath the surface of that new alignment, the real game was only beginning.